Good morning everyone and welcome back to my channel. So today we'll be continuing our series on how to begin a family tree. If you haven't already watched my first video, I'll put the link in the description box below and you can check that one out first. But just to refresh, it was about how to build a basic ancestral chart and then using births, deaths and marriage records to fill in the detail. So firstly, I just want to talk a little bit more about birth, death and marriage records. They should really help you expand your tree, but there's just a few things that you should remember while you're using them. You should use the certificates to check the details you've got on your ancestral chart. You should be able to confirm or correct any of the information that's been given to you from your relatives. Just make sure that you are always moving from the present back to the past. Because if you skip a few generations and there's a bit of a mistake in there, that whole branch will then be wrong. And you've just wasted time and effort and probably money on building a branch that's not even correct. So we just have to stay methodical in our approach. So we have to begin with the furthest back ancestor that we are absolutely certain of their details. So that's probably going to be your parents or maybe your grandparents. So as an example, let's say that I start with my grandparents' marriage certificate. That certificate should tell me their ages and their birthplaces. It'll also tell me where they were living at the time of their marriage, their parents' names, and maybe also their occupations too. So if I was missing any of that information, I could now fill that into my ancestral chart. And using that information, I can now search for a birth certificate. So I've got their birthplace and I've got their age, so I should be able to narrow the search and make sure that I get the correct certificate for them. So from there, I can now take the next step backward to the next generation. I can get their parents' death certificates, that is my great-grandparents. Those death certificates will tell me information about how long they were married, all of their children's names, their occupation, and of course information about their death. Knowing how long that they were married helps us get their marriage certificate. And then so on and so forth. We keep working backwards as far as we can within the records. In Australia, that's to about 1850. And prior to that, you move into parish records. Now, a big caveat on birth, death and marriage records, even though they are the official records and therefore the best and most detailed, they are not entirely flawless. So you're relying on an informant, which means the information's only as good as the informant's knowledge. So there's 3 different kinds of informant errors that I've come across while using birth, death and marriage records. So first there's the informant who was removed from the facts. An informant's memory is not infallible, and sometimes they'll be recalling names and things like that of people that they've never met. So for example, in one death certificate that I ordered, the man's daughter was the informant, and she listed his parents' names as being Henry and Emily. When in fact I found that his parents' names were Richard and Marianne. For a while this discrepancy really concerned me. I wasn't sure if they were the right people, but it turned out that the informant had never met her grandparents. They died long before she was born. So most likely she either recalled the names wrong or she was remembering nicknames. So it just took a lot of extra digging to establish that the discrepancy was an informant error. The second type of informant is the one who actually seeks to deceive. They're actively, purposefully lying on their certificate for a reason. So a really good example of this that I had was my how many greats are they? My great-great-grandparents. They got married in South Australia and had a few children, and then my great-great-grandmother seems to just drop off the records. My great-great-grandfather gets remarried, and on his marriage certificate he says he's a widow. So I looked for a long time for my great-great-grandmother's death record, but I could never find it. Eventually I found her in a destitute asylum just a couple of years after presumably leaving him. And then I thought, oh, how sad, she must have died just after that. But a long time later, I found that she got married again in Victoria using her maiden name. So back then, it was easy to just lie and say, I've never been married before, and checking the records between states probably wasn't easy, so they got away with it. So he lied and said that he was a widow, and she lied and said that she was a spinster, which meant that they both lied with the intention of being able to get married a second time, therefore committing bigamy. Okay, the third type of informant is the one who is distressed. So an example of this one is my 4 times great-grandfather. When he was the informant on his wife's death certificate, he listed all his children's names, but he got all of their ages completely wrong. I know this because the ages don't match up with any other records, but all I can think was that his wife had just died and he was probably distressed and upset, and therefore he just wasn't really thinking clearly when he gave the information. Okay, so that caveat aside, we'll get back to our chart. So the birth, death and marriage records should have helped us to solidify the information that we have in our ancestral chart. So the next thing that you'll want to do is flesh out the lives of the people that we have in our chart at this point. So there's several avenues that you might want to take here. Okay, you might want to take out a subscription with Ancestry.com or Find My Past or another subscription-based service. Or alternatively, you might want to purchase software such as Family Tree Maker. This comes down to personal preference, how much money you've got. You might even prefer just to work on paper, the old-fashioned way. But these days, most people like having an online account. The access to the records that they give you is unparalleled, and also it keeps all of your information together. You can actually start a tree with most of those websites without paying for a subscription. So you can just sign up and create a basic account and build a tree from there. You usually don't have to pay unless you want to start accessing the records. If you have the money, it is a good investment, but if you don't, you can of course get started without it. It's just a little extra work. There are also free searchable websites that are worth checking out. I'll be doing follow-up videos on how to use all of them, so stay tuned. But if you want to go and have a look now, I would suggest having a look at the Ryerson Index, State Archives, in whichever state that you're researching, National Archives, Family Search, and Trove. There are of course many more websites and paths to take, but that's it for the second part of this video series. I'll be back soon with more. If you liked this video, please give it a thumbs up and hit the subscribe button and ring the notification bell if you want to see more. Thank you for watching, and hopefully I'll see you in my next video. Bye! The second sort is the informant who seeks to deceive. So this person...